Just a little story to kick off this little session, and it's all about Sarah. All of these stories, they all take place a very, very long time ago, and Sarah, she was about 15 or 16 years old, and well, unfortunately when she was a little girl, her mum died, so she just lived with her dad on the farm, just the two of them out there, and but now she was kind of old enough to look after herself through the night, or so her father thought. And so he said to her, I have to go into town tonight, I'll be away all night, and this is the first time you'll be left on your own, you'll be okay. And Sarah said, yeah, of course I'll be okay. Well, good, her father. Then I'll just, I'll go and you look after yourself and make sure the house is locked up and you're secure, and I'll be back first thing in the morning. So Sarah said, that's fine. And the fire was lit in the kitchen, and she sat by the fire after she waved goodbye to her father, who went off on his horse and carriage, and she sat by the fire and she'd made some soup, and she ate soup, and then she sat whilst the candles in the fire burnt down, and when the candles in the fire had burnt down and it was dark outside, well, that was time to go to bed. So she had locked the barn, she locked the kitchen door, and then she went through to the living room and she shuttered the windows and she barred those, and she went to the front door and she just checked to make sure that she had locked that, and that door was locked. And so she went to the bottom of the stairs, through the door there, and she shut that door, and then just to make sure that she was completely secure, she locked that door as well, and then with the light of the candle that she had, she made her way up the stairs, and she went into her father's room and she closed the shutters on the window there, or she closed them earlier just to make sure that they were still shuttered and locked, and she went through to her own room, made sure that her own shutters were closed and locked, and they were, and everything was fine, and she shut the door and locked it. And then she went into the wardrobe and looked in the wardrobe to make sure that there was nothing there, and there was nothing there, and that was fine. And she put the candle by the side of the bed, and just before she climbed into bed, she looked under the bed to make sure that there was nothing under the bed, and there was nothing under the bed, so that was fine. She climbed into bed, and she picked up a Bible, and she read a couple of pages from the Bible, and she closed the Bible, and well, now it was time to go to sleep, so she blew out the candle. And then, when it was all dark, that was when she heard the voice that said,
Good. Now that we're safely locked in.
What's the story? It's called Blue. The story, well, John, he was an old man. He was in his 70s, 80s, and his wife had died, and he lived on the farm all by himself. And even though his family had said, you cannot stay up there, living up there on the hill by yourself, come down into the village and live with us, he was a stubborn man, and he would have nothing of it. I've lived on this farm all my life, and I'll probably die here, he said. And so there he stayed, and he lived his life. But one night, when he'd locked up the barn, and he'd sat very much like Sarah by the fire, in those days, I guess once it got dark, there was nothing to do but go to bed. He had eaten his soup, and the fire had died in the grate, and it was time to go to bed, so he had taken himself off upstairs to bed. And he'd put on his nightshirt, and he climbed into bed, and he read a page or two from the Bible, as he did in those days, put the Bible by the side of his bed and blew out the candle, and lay there in his bed. And it was then he heard the noise. It was the barn door. I must oil those hinges in the morning, John said to himself. And then he thought, I'm sure I locked the barn door before. I'm sure I did. So he climbed out of bed and he walked across and he opened the curtains and he looked out into the moonlit courtyard, and down there, across at the... No, there was nobody there. The barn doors were closed. He went back, climbed into bed and pulled up the bedclothes and lay in his bed and was just ready to drift off to sleep again, and he heard the other noise. This was the sound of the garden gate opening. I must oil those hinges in the morning, he said to himself. And then he thought, I'm sure I closed the... It can't have been the wind. Was that the wind? He climbed out of bed again and he went to the curtains and he looked outside. Well, there was no wind. There were curtains. There were clouds hanging in the sky, but they certainly weren't being blown by any wind, and the gate was made out of metal. So why would that be blowing in the wind? But there was nobody there. So he climbed back into bed and he made ready to go to sleep, and then he heard the next noise. This was the kitchen door. He definitely remembered locking the kitchen door before he came to bed. So why should it be opening? So he lay there, and as he lay there wondering what it was that was causing the kitchen door to creak like that, then he heard the other noise, like the wind, blowing around the corners of his cottage. I am the ghost of the bleeding finger, and I am coming, coming, coming. That was not the wind. John knew that much. He pulled his sheets a little bit closer to his chin as he heard the door at the bottom of the stairs. I must follow those hinges in the morning, he said to himself. And then he heard the noise again. I am the ghost of the bleeding finger, and I am coming, coming, coming. Oh, Johnny didn't want to do himself quite. He pulled those blankets and sheets right up against his chin, and he was frozen solid in his bed. He couldn't move, and as he lay there, he saw a strange glow coming under the door. And he could hear the noise coming along the corridor. And then his door opened. He leapt out of bed. He dived under the bed and wrapped all the blankets and sheets around him, and he lay under the bed, and he heard the voice again. I am the ghost of the bleeding finger, and I am coming, coming, coming. There was nowhere to go. This was not the wind, and this was no nightmare. He was definitely awake. He pinched himself. What was he to do? Then he could hear the bed being pushed away above him. He could hear the feet being dragged across the floor. And then, as he held on to the sheets, as he held on to the blankets, he could feel an icy cold wind coming under those blankets and through those sheets and prizing the sheets out of his fingers. And as he lay there, the sheets were pulled back, and he looked up through his eyes to see a face of some terrible spook hanging and hovering over him, looking down at him, and his hair of this spook wafting as if in a ghostly breeze, looking at him, saying, I am the ghost of the bleeding finger. I can't bandage, please, because it really, really hurts.